So this is our third candidate. Introducing to you Mr. Charlie Van Zant. The format of this conversation is we have probably an hour and 15 minutes or so, hour and a half the most. And I'll start by asking you to give us your background, explain to the group why you feel you're the best candidate for the position in Sarasota. And then they will go and each ask you a question.
Okay.
Right around the table. They have a mic in front of them. They'll just pass that around. And then at the conclusion of the conversation, I'll ask you to summarize whatever you want to leave the group with. This is a community advisory group. They're wonderful people with excellent questions and very invested in the county and the education of the students here. So with that,
Is there a time parameter? Do I need to keep each answer to 2 or 3?
No, I think we're good because by the time we get around, this is our third go around, so we have pretty good practice here. So
Okay, well then my wife's kitchen timer is just simply for myself. Doesn't have answers, but I learned a long time ago. Am I ready to go? I'm already
ready to go.
Talking over you. Well, I'm Charlie Van Zant. I'm thrilled to be here with you today. I moved to Clay County, Florida, where I still live today when I was 10. Entered 5th grade in between the holiday break before New Year's, and that shaped a lot of my life. The reason we moved there was my mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and back in the early 70s, they did not have all the tools we have today to quickly eradicate it and make it go away. So as a 5th grader, I got enrolled in the school. I had no idea that, I was in my last couple of years with her, but what I saw and what I would love to see Sarasota do, and probably already does, is what the Clay County school system did for me as a child, and that's what drew me into this kind of public service. The teachers at the school were out at the baseball and football fields coaching us. You went to the grocery store, everybody was looking out for everybody else's children. Now, my father was bivocational. He was a pastor and an architect. They kept the pastors humble back then, didn't pay him much, so he had to keep doing architecture to pay all the medical bills. Again, as a 10-year-old, I didn't realize all that. It got explained to me later in life. But those were very humble beginnings. I went all the way through the Clay County school system. With no internet back then, my dad gave me 2 choices. He says, you can join the Army like your Uncle Johnny and your brother, or you can go to college. So I exercised all the options I was aware of as a 17-year-old and enlisted in the Florida Army National Guard as a helicopter mechanic, and then got enrolled in the University of Florida and graduated there in 93. And somewhere around 91, 92, we were at Fort Hood, Texas, finishing up an exercise with Apache helicopters. And again, I'm a mechanic. I'm blue, totem pole, go get the water bucket, Van Zant, go get the toolbox, don't scratch nothing inside the aircraft, we got to fly the General today. So all that kind of stuff. And after that, I was like in my 3rd year of college, and they said, well, hey, you haven't broken anything here. We might make an officer and let you fly one. Graduate from college and come back and talk to us. So went through all those hoops. Met my wife in the College of Architecture there at University of Florida. She got a couple of degrees from them. Every time I would deploy, she'd go back and get another graduate degree, it seemed like. And so that brought me to a career of becoming a pilot in the Army. When I moved back, about a month before I moved back from Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is now called Mike Novosel, who is a giant in Florida, in Army aviation history. I had a former teacher and coach call and say, hey, we're morphing all the vocational classes to technology. I need you to come teach technology. I'm like, Coach Harper, I don't know. We just bought our first computer. This is 1997. I had a Juno.com email account that I shared with my wife, and the reason we bought the computer was for her to use AutoCAD because they were getting away from the paper and pencil drawings. He said, you'll be fine. You'll know more than the junior high kids. So I started getting certified as a technology teacher and teaching full-time. I taught for several years as a sub while I was in college. I worked at UPS, worked as a substitute teacher, and worked with the Guard because that's what I had to do to put myself through college. Back then the GI Bill was a whopping $140 a month. if you were a National Guardsman and you had 12-hour load and all that. So fast forward to the end of that first school year, I had a ball teaching full-time as a Clay County teacher, and the next summer I learned that our school board member was not seeking re-election, and so I said, what's it take to run for school board? They're like, you got a driver's license, a clean record, you're 18, registered voter in Clay County. I said, yeah, I got all that. So knowing everything that a 27-year-old knows, I ran for school board and won. 3 days before the election, I was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, getting ready to go to the Middle East for the first time. So let me be sensitive to our time here. 14 years on the school board, 4 years as the school superintendent, went through the recession, 3 Middle East deployments, rated in OH-58s, Apache, and Black Hawk helicopters. Some days were great, some days were boring, some days were terrifying. That about sums up my military career. During that time, Florida got hit by hurricanes right and left, and that's what Governor Bush decided we needed to change aircraft from a gunship to a more medevac, utility-friendly, to bring everybody water, baby food, diapers, all the things they forgot to get before the hurricane come or didn't realize it was coming, etc. And that's been my life. I have a passion and a calling to serve students and to serve soldiers. And at 51 years old as a lieutenant colonel and 33 years in the Florida Guard, the Army said, hey buddy, it's time to retire. So I retired last year. And ended up with 21 of those 33 years being on active duty. So they kept sending a check to me. So it's given me great flexibility to being more involved in my children's life. My wife, who just thankfully came back around, dropped off my glasses, I've been married to for 29 years this July. 2 children, Luke and Wyatt. Luke's a 20-year-old firefighter in the city of Jacksonville. And Wyatt is entering his senior year at my alma mater, Keystone Heights High School. So I put them through the school system I went through because of the way the school system treated me and my family, and one of our most critical points. Had just a short amount of time in the private sector in an education company, and actually right before COVID, our counter-drug training academy at Camp Blanding, Florida in Clay County was about to undergo an academic accreditation. And the general I was working for at the time says, I need you to come hunker down at counter-drug for about 6 months. Do not go to the range, do not fly. I need you to get them squared away for this academic accreditation. Sit at your desk and do what you're told. Roger, because he didn't have anybody else in the Army that knew how to do that. Now in education, we in Sarasota County, you have wonderful, talented educators, and you know how to do all this kind of stuff, but it was a big deal for him, and he thought I was the right guy to do that. I did one more assignment at Fort Bragg. My last assignment in the Army, I was in personnel, human resources, if you will, at U.S. Army Forces Command, which is a 4-star general command. 750,000 soldiers approximately of the 1 million in the Army, inclusive of the Army National Guard, and all the Army reserves. About 3/4 of the Army is under Forces Command. All your aviation, your special forces, your troops that go into contact. So I had a slice of human resources that I led as their senior officer in charge, policy, personnel, and programs. That's it. What are your questions of me? And Sebastian, you're the student group?
Yeah.
When I was a rising senior in Clay County, Florida, our superintendent, Ann Wiggins, who's now 89 years old, just celebrated her birthday recently, called my dad and said, I want Charlie to serve on the Clay County School Board, CAC. I think it was called an advisory committee, some kind of advisory committee. So I got to have that experience, and it just kept drawing me to the school system. My dad designed and built a lot of buildings for the school system. So that was kind of my entry point into really seeing the big picture in 1987, I believe.
Okay, well, we're going to start.
All right. Yeah. So I'm Sebastian Driscoll. I'm going to be a junior next year.
Wonderful.
My question to you is this. After viewing both of the videos that you made for the district and us, you addressed a lot of different issues that you saw within Sarasota.
Mm-hmm.
You touched up a little bit on what you would do, but one thing you did mention is that if you became superintendent, you would pivot very quickly.
Okay.
So obviously you've given us this now, but my question, just to hear it from you, is what would that pivot look like? You know, let's say you become superintendent. What's that first couple of things to start that pivot off?
Okay, so there are 6 specific things, and this is Charlie Van Zant's view of Sarasota County schools as an outsider only being able to look at your website. I have no doubt, as high performing academically as Sarasota has always been, you've got some very talented people. Has the earth shifted under the feet of every teacher and administrator and support person all over the United States in the last several years? Absolutely it has. So first things first, I never took control of a unit in the military or the Clay County School Board and said, all right, you're all not doing it right, let me tell you how to do it. I'll take the first couple of months, and this needs to happen like as school is starting and before school starts to help assess where we are in teaching and learning, specifically primary grades reading, and how that relates to your lower quartile. As I see it and can discern it, if we take the white children out of the proficiency ratings, every other subgroup, whether it's special needs students, English language learning students, impoverished free and reduced lunch percentage, which I think you're at 42%, I don't want to quote it. But right around there, I heard in the budget workshop, your performance really drops off. So we need to figure out what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what we need to do to shore up the instruction around reading. Because if a student can read by the end of 3rd grade, everything we want to happen for a student happens at a much greater rate, and they can learn the other subjects. I see 2 law enforcement, very senior law enforcement officers in here. I spent a lot of my time as a school board member serving on the Department of Children and Families Committee in North Florida, the Juvenile Justice Committee for the circuit that encompasses Duval, Clay, and Nassau County. I believe it's Circuit 4. I'm not an attorney. But that's been just a minute. Everything that we don't want to happen for a student if they're illiterate at the end of 3rd grade, the juvenile justice, the needing extra services, all that escalates in a direction we don't want it to go. So we need to shore up the gaps for all children. We need to teach all children. And I've addressed a couple of specific issues in there around primary grades reading, how that will align and tie in with ESE, ELL students, your behaviors, like everybody's behaviors. Understand, hear my heart here. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. Everybody's in Florida and in the nation has behaviors and discipline in a manner and a frequency and a severity that we've not ever seen in this country. And so we have to figure out what's going on there. There's some well-researched, proven strategies around that, and we need to take a look at what you're already doing. I'm not the expert. Your people that are already here are the expert, but that will help everything else that I just talked about. And on the reading specifically, the State Board of Education called out some programs that everybody's using. So I don't want to call out a particular program and hurt anybody's business, but there's programs mentioned in your reading program that you're using that the State Board of Education are saying these are not appropriate for Tier 1, 2, and 3 interventions. So we need to again look at why you're using them. There might be a place to use them, but we need a solid, well-researched, phonics-based curriculum, and your teachers and teacher leaders are already the experts. We just need to go back in and look at what the practice is and what it could look like based on what we want to do, which is close achievement gaps. So some quick assessments and pivots, that will come. Who's the money guys? Is there a CFO on here? CPA. So that costs money, right? Because you're going to be pulling teachers in for some professional development, and they already got all they can eat in the buffet every day. So whatever that has to look like in terms of some professional development will have to be paid for by the district to get them the professional development they're going to require around whatever we collaboratively select once we get all stakeholders. We just have to do it pretty quickly. If we languish and take a year or two to do it, that's those children that aren't learning already, that achievement gap just continues to go in the wrong direction. And I won't be the guy selected to come here as your superintendent to be the first superintendent that ever didn't get an A in Sarasota County, Florida. That's not my goal. That adequately answer your question?
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Cottrell. And before we start, as a spouse of a veteran, I'd like to say thank you for your service.
You're very welcome.
Looking over the packet you provided with this, your superintendent action plan, goal number 4, the ESC and reading plan alignment really hits home to me. And that kind of goes with the question that I want to ask, and I've asked it of everybody else so far. Is a lot of people we all know that there's a gap in our reading and math, and a lot of kids are not proficient. They're well below their grade level in those 2 areas. And a lot of the focus is on, let's go back and redo how we handle pre-K through third to 5th grade. That way we can prevent that gap. But we're already at a point right now in the district where we have kids that are in junior high and high school that are already not reading or have math skills at their level. They're well behind. So we seem to forget about those kids. We're focused on how are we going to fix it at the lower level so it doesn't happen. If you were to become superintendent of the Sarasota County, what would you do to make sure that we address those students that are already past elementary, that are in junior high and high school, who are already severely below grade level, so that they could graduate and walk out those doors successful with some type of skill for the future?
That is a great question. I saw it at a less severe level in the late 90s, teaching junior high myself. If a junior high student couldn't read, they couldn't learn any of the technology skills I was trying to provide, right? Because it was a kind of I had 24 different modules in my classroom, everything from laser engraving to aerodynamics to digital photography. Back when digital photography was the new shiny thing, right? Now we all carry around. Anyway, long story short, we have to look at what the dropout prevention strategies are currently and shore them up. Whatever we're doing currently might be working in the right direction, but it's not obviously working well enough. So right now, as a retired military veteran and not an active superintendent, my staff is me, okay? So I've looked at everything that I can as best as I can through your website, but there are several good secondary school reading recovery plans, and sometimes you have to push in extra resources into that classroom. Sometimes you have to pull them out. I don't like pulling them out any more than is absolutely necessary, because then they're not reading on grade with their grade level peers, and they're a little bit ostracized. But that will come back around to what I said first. We have to pivot, we have to assess, and then we have to get on that horse and ride pretty quickly. And all this needs to happen all at once. So in education, often, like when I was raising my children, nobody likes change. And even if they're hungry or wet or grumpy, even as infants, it took my sons a minute to warm up to the change. Okay, so I don't expect everybody to move at breakneck speed, but I will ask for collaboration. I'll ask for the people that are already doing it to tell me what they've done, why they've done it, and what else they need, because the answers are here. I guarantee you, your teachers that are doing the dropout prevention are shaking their heads and like, this isn't enough. And I know that I can go to University of Florida and look on their website and grab UFly and this will help us, or something like that. So it's got to be addressed. It's got to be addressed at the exact same time as the primary grades recovery, at the exact same time as the achievement gap that's widening and heading in the wrong direction. And in the high school grades, we've had great success previously in my superintendency in building grad trackers and teams of people around the high school students to make sure they actually get enough credits to graduate, catch up on reading. But what that looks like, for those of you that have military, and that's 3 minutes, military backgrounds, is getting down into what I call the Eaches. You have to learn Sebastian and Charlie and Eric, and that's about all the names I can call off the top of my head already. But you have to learn each student, because they have individual needs, high expectations, getting the teachers on board, you got to pay them for their time, and then figuring out we meet that kid wherever they are, that student, that learner, whatever you like to call children in school. They have a place and they have a story, and there's a reason they got to where they are. We have to meet them where they are and care enough to not leave them there, especially if they're a struggling reader. And so the pull in, pull out, the extra curriculum, the instructional materials aligned with the curriculum, aligned with their IEP, if they're special needs and individual education plan, all that has to synchronize. I've done that my entire life, whether in the school system or flying helicopters, with talking to guys on the ground. Everything has to happen right at this right time, and everybody has to be in sync. And if I'm just guessing after the research I've done, we're not synchronized, because most organizations are not. But I'll stop on that and be respectful of everybody getting a question.
Can I interrupt for just a second? I have a little microphone issue. Can I?
Sure.
Be careful. Can you take that? I'm gonna have you just leave this on.
Is there a way I can talk louder at this thing?
Unfortunately, they're two different
Oh.
microphones. And we're just gonna leave this on the counter.
Okay, perfect.
I think I'm good. Can you say something real quick for me?
Yes, ma'am. Test, test.
You're good.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Hi there, I'm Teresa DeWitt. I'm a mental health professional and I have twins. And we are currently homeschooling. We've taken a break from the district due to the reevaluation of reading and some other programs. And we have high hopes of integrating back into Sarasota School District. With that being said, I was informed that phonics had been officially taken out of our district in 2017. Currently, right now, our reading strategy is iReady plus social emotional learning. And this strategy has only resulted in 63% in our reading. So that is barely an A rating.
Yes, ma'am.
So the majority on our board have communicated that CASEL, social emotional learning, does not meet the academic excellence that we want to achieve. So 2 questions. 1, what is your opinion on CASEL and social emotional learning? And 2, how will you incorporate parents into a new reading strategy to rise above the 63%?
Okay, that first word, something, hassle plus social emotional learning?
CASEL. CASEL is
Castle, like a
CASEL.
castle.
CASEL is the
I'm sorry,
accreditation. That's okay. The accreditation arm for social emotional learning to meet the accreditation to receive federal dollars through the American Rescue Plan.
Okay, okay.
So basically, our admin and our superintendents are being held hostage if they have a different strategy than what the federal government wants. But that's another
Okay,
area.
well, there are always lots of federal and state laws to obey, but phonics is not illegal. And the State Board of Education this spring met and said that they named a couple of the programs that you mentioned, and they said they were not effective, and they're now in prescribing prescribing phonics. You have one program in there, I'm really trying not to throw different programs under the bus, that has some very light phonics, but not absolutely strong enough. And somewhere along the way, it became acceptable in public education in Florida and lots of other places to sit a struggling reader in front of a computer or an iPad and think that was going to teach them how to read. I used to have a commander that used to look at us and he'd say, "Boys, hope is not a method." It is not. We can't just put them down there and hope that the one that starts with an I you mentioned gets them there. It will not. We have to put the sweat equity in, as I described earlier in the primary and secondary grades recovery plans. We have to go get a strong, knowledge-based, research-proven phonics, integrated, strong phonics. What you have now has light phonics. It'd be like me doing a little yoga versus my 17-year-old that can clean and jerk 245 pounds. Okay, so that's a big difference from being a little bit flexible to being just raw strength. And we need that much stronger phonics program, and there's a couple of them out there. They're not hard to get to, they're not illegal to use, It will not put us out of compliance. The people that are having the most success, and I will give Reading Mastery a plug. We used it in Clay. When I took over as superintendent in Clay, little different situation. I had to go to everybody in Clay County. It was elected just like the school board members. And I focused on third grade reading scores, recovering the budget, restoring our savings account, and high school graduation rates. And guess what? They all went in the right direction. Our graduation rates rose 10% in 4 years, and I can't take credit the first year they didn't go anywhere. But if you look at a year or two after I left Clay, the 17-18 spring test, that was really my team's work. And anybody, whatever happens here next year is the previous superintendent's work and plan. And if it goes good, I can't take credit for it going well. But the plan I've laid in front of you is just an initial contact plan. That will lead us into making the necessary adjustments to a strategic plan, which I understand y'all paid $100,000 when the board members threw that figure out to write the current strategic plan. The nice thing about me is all our tax dollars, to include mine, have already paid for me to understand how to think strategically, plan strategically, and execute a strategic plan if the board signs off on it, and you as the community and the teachers give us the right feedback. So I promise you we can get where we need to go from where we are. Phonics is not illegal. It is the preferred method. And if offered the opportunity, I will come in here and lead a quick listening assessment tour that will continue on every week, every day, every year that I'm here, because nothing's flat, right? You can't just put your finger in something and take it out and it never changes again. But the point that Sebastian brought up, I think I mentioned in my video about pivoting, if you want to stay in a district, you have to pivot. But more importantly, if you want to serve the moral imperative of every child learning that's enrolled in your district, no matter what their ethnicity, socioeconomic background, needs and strengths, capabilities, it's got to be with a strong, well-researched, phonics-based program, and we can do that. Did that adequately answer? Is there any?
The last question was about parents. How did you
Oh,
incorporate parent involvement
okay.
on the ground
So
level?
everything looks a little bit different. I had a lot of concerns in Clay County about books on the shelf, library books, and back then everything didn't have to be fenced in 2012, and it was aunts, uncles, grandmas, everybody had concerns, right? So my instructional building was open. Literally, you could walk in the back door, and I created a room, and I put any book that somebody wanted to see. If it wasn't in there, the books they asked the most about, I put in there. And all you had to do was come by the front office and let my administrative assistant know you wanted to go over to the long building. And she'd do like this. She'd run your little thing, and you walk over there and spend as much time as you wanted. And if you needed some help, I'd send one of the literacy coaches or somebody that worked full-time at the district in there to explain or show. And if she heard about a book or he heard about a book that wasn't in there, we'd get it through the library system into that thing. And when it was there, we'd allow them to come back. So I have always appreciated parental involvement and always wanted more of it than I could get. In some schools, you go into school, and a lot of times you can almost gauge how successful a school is going to be from your parent night. If it's packed to the rafters with everybody's mother and grandmother and dad, hey, you're likely going to have a really engaged family dynamic there. And those kids are probably, most of them, going to do very well. If you walk into a parent night and almost nobody's there, and so we'd cook spaghetti, grill hamburgers, we'd do whatever we had to get more people involved, feed them and they will come, and get that input is critical. Nobody knows your child better than you. You're the responsible adult, you the parent, in this scenario. You've chosen, for whatever reasons, to homeschool your kids. I think you said because the public school wasn't currently meeting your expectations. So you're exactly the kind of family's children I would love to have in the public school system. So I will work very hard to meet you and others similarly situated so that we get you back in there. And I've seen it work from all different angles. There was no option for my father. When my mother died, the oldest four of us were public schooled. He remarried 10 years after my mother died and had a couple more children. They were all homeschooled, and they're doing fabulous. They're professionals. One of them is a teacher. Two of them are in college. So I have half siblings the same age as my children, which is another long story. But they were all homeschooled up through 12th grade and then entered the public university system in Florida with no problem. So eventually they got to go to a public school, but not all the time for reasons that their mother and my stepmother had. Did that adequately
Yes,
answer?
absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Valerie Kammermeyer. I have two students in the district. I have an elementary and a middle. My question kind of goes off of Teresa's question about iReady. My elementary student is a struggling reader and was at risk for being held back. My middle school student is gifted. So I have both ends of the spectrum. And they both hate iReady. What is your view as far as not only iReady, but other technology-based educational tools and kids sitting in front of a computer to learn? And how would you change that?
Okay. Well, I've hit on it a little bit. You cannot sit a child in front of any software system that's a struggling reader and expect the right outcome. Some of us are more auditory learners, some of us are visual learners, but you have to put in the hard work of sitting down with a child with an appropriate phonics-based curriculum with instructional materials. And the instructional materials your middle schooler needs are going to be different, at least the supplemental ones, than what your elementary school student needs, but they both need it. And I will say this on pre-K, the only thing that I was shocked or surprised about, I had Zoom calls with each of the school board members individually last week. The only thing that I really picked up on, it was great conversations, but the thing that surprised me was how few pre-K classrooms there are in the entire district. Now you as a parent totally get to decide whether you want your child to have pre-K or not. My oldest one had it at a private Christian school at 3 and 4 years old that was 2 blocks from our house. And I was on an 18-month deployment, and that my wife would have pulled her hair out probably without it. And my second one, they said, we want some model students, so can you sign up your child through Episcopal Services Network at the mall and then let them possibly be a model student if he fits the criteria. And none of the 3 and 4 year olds know if they need the help, and they've been identified through pre-K or some service to need the help or not need the help. But I can tell you, both of my students, both of my teenage boys, well, one's 17, one's 20, did so much better and were reading at such a faster pace. It made me a quick believer in pre-K, and then all of a sudden I'm going to pre-K classes. And I didn't have one in every school, but you can use your Title I funding, and you have some Title I schools down here, and you can centrally locate them so that everybody does want to participate can. And you have every right as a parent to speak up if nobody's helping your student other than sitting them in front of iReady. A good friend of mine, his wife's Ukrainian. They met at University of Florida, and he was on my second deployment with me, and we've stayed close. So his wife was raised in Russia, where you just got what you got, or at least the former USSR. He went to Afghanistan. He got hurt. Coming back, he ended up at Fort Stewart, Georgia for 2 years in the Wounded Warrior Recovery Program. Both of his kids were in danger of being held back as third graders this year, and one of them's in what we would call a reading recovery or summer boot camp just for promotion. And I keep telling him, because we spent spring break together on a lake, and I'm like, what they're giving your kids is not right. Here's what you need to go ask for. Here's what you need to go ask for. And I won't tell you what county they're in, but we have to get in the driver's seat with our own children's education. You obviously are. That's why you're here. So I'll give you, any of you that want to jot my cell phone number down, it's 352-682-1726. I'll say that one more time, 352-682-1726. I can share with you some things that have worked. Again, don't know your child, don't know their exact situation. But I'm open for comment after 8 p.m. tonight. And moving forward, I might never come to Sarasota. I don't know that this offer will be extended or not. But there are programs out there that work. They're beyond the programs you mentioned. They're beyond the programs in your current reading program. And I'm hoping there will be the right mix of leadership, recognition, humility among the school board and your instructional and academic folks that you can right the ship for your elementary schooler.
Hello, my name is Medalia Glover, and I too would like to thank you for your service because I have family members in the military, so much appreciated.
You're very welcome.
But my question to you revolves around the type of support that you're going to be giving educators when you, or if you are chosen to be our superintendent. And I see here that in your action plan, you want to be able to build public trust, open communication, and collaboration. So can you speak a little bit about how you're going to support those teachers, build trust with those teachers so that they're able to ensure the students are being educated with facts and with the truth, especially revolving around history?
Right. So specifically with teachers or with all stakeholders?
Really with all stakeholders,
Okay.
but definitely.
So as you get a chance to digest that plan tonight, I'm not sure when Mr. Ferry's report has to go to the board, you'll see, and if you Google superintendent's 100-day plan, any superintendent with any sense that's gone into any district realizes you can't go in and snatch the earth out from under the teachers and the parents' feet without taking a lot of input. If you want to get people angry with you, you mess with their money, but the number one reason if we were playing Jeopardy would be mess with their children. So anything I seek to do will be to support the teachers, to support the children and their parents, support those families, whatever they look like. I mean, you have grandmothers and grandfathers raising children and aunts and uncles, and it looks different everywhere you go, okay? So I acknowledge that. I like to play sports, I like to eat, I like to hunt, I like to fish, I like to play golf. You invite me to any of those activities, especially if I come down here the first year, my wife and oldest son will still be in Clay County getting him through his senior year. I'm not gonna uproot my own wife and son because they're in a great situation. My wife and the dog will join me in a year. My son's got a few college plans that are already out of the state of Florida. And my older one, as I mentioned, is already employed and living out of the house. So I just literally down to my bone marrow do not believe in messing up something that's going the right direction. However, if everything was going the right direction, I wouldn't be here. You already had a superintendent, so somebody thought that wasn't working, and I don't know that gentleman. So I go to everything I'm invited to. If you invite me to a potluck dinner at the clubhouse in your community, if you invite me to your business person's luncheon, Rotary, Kiwanis, I eat terrible rubber chicken upon demand if invited. I have other food preferences, and we can get into that later. I cook, okay? I love to cook breakfast. I've hosted breakfasts and invited business leaders and pastors and youth pastors and administrators, and I cook for everybody. And I sit them around geographically. In my head, I can't escape being an Army aviator, so I think of everything as how it lays out on a map. I need to know where I am. I need to know where everybody else is. That's the way I dealt with my principals. I had a huge map with a locking case in my office, so I knew where I had everybody, and as we had hot spots, sometimes I'd have to shovel somebody's magnets on the board. But I need to embed in this community and learn enough and as much about every organization and family that I possibly can, and I will go to them. If they want to come to my office, I realize this is being live streamed. I just gave out my cell phone number that I've had for a couple of decades. Sheriff's shaking his head, but hey, they have to be able to talk to me. I can't call everybody back in a day, okay? So I'm hoping that if I come into this job, I'd have at least one administrative assistant, and my previous one was great, but their job, and when I moved up in ranks in the Army and had enlisted people helping me with those administrative duties, first 24 hours an email or a phone call comes in, they know enough to route it to where it needs to go in the district to solve the problem. Within 24 hours, I expect a report back. Hey, boss, I solved it. Hey, Mr. Van Zant, it didn't work. Hey, Colonel Van Zant, you're going to need to call this person. It's fixing to blow up in our face. And so then I react to that. Some of them, my secretary would just immediately pull to my attention because we knew the community, we knew the family, we knew whatever. So when I left my superintendency, we had 37,000 students. I think y'all are right around 44,000. That's not terribly different, but people's problems are more complex. COVID showed all the parents in the country what their students were actually reading and learning, and we're not where we were. I've stayed engaged in education through the private sector and the military, and in every facet I've been involved in, I've watched those changes morph, if you will, and so we're in a much more intense area, and somehow, instead of just learning that in Florida, education is going to change every year when the legislature meets, just like we'll have those summer afternoon thunder boomers. I mean, if you don't like the weather, wait 20 minutes, it's going to change. Florida education has proven to me the same way. Has it always gone the right direction? No, it has not. But if we hadn't started moving in the late 90s, early 2000s, we'd have no accountability. So, I'll meet people where they are. If they're not where they want to be, I'll try to best assess and diagnose why, and whatever we can do to serve their children and families better, I will lean into that. But at the same time, I'm not going to go and just grab some wild off-the-wall thing. We're going to have alignment between the schools, alignment between the grade levels, and the priorities will be whatever. In this situation, I don't have a clear mandate from the community. The board got elected and had a clear mandate for the community, so they're looking for a superintendent / CEO that can process, synthesize all the inputs, all the data, and give them what they're looking for. And there are metrics. When I learned to fly a helicopter, you have an altimeter, you have an airspeed indicator, you have RPM indicator, kind of like a tachometer. You have all these pieces of information coming at you. When they're balanced and all in the green, life is good. But when you're flying around and all of a sudden it starts making a different noise as the helicopter than it did when you took off, you probably have a problem. And so at that point, you have to figure out, is there an open field and do I need to land right now, or can I nurse this thing back to the flight facility or back south out of Iraq or wherever you happen to be that maybe you don't want to be at the moment? So all these things have to come together. Education has kind of the same going, and right now I'm picking up that everybody's not happy with the sound it's making. There's some knocking and some pinging. Doesn't make me doubt that we have good people in Sarasota County, but there are probably some times that we need to make some fine-tune adjustments. And so that's how I'll approach that. Did that adequately answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Elvira Lloyd. Thank you for your service. I'm a chiropractor. We have been part of the Sarasota County School Board family since first grade. My daughter is a rising senior.
Okay.
We have an amazing student body, a very diverse student body that requires a lot of help and support. How will you ensure that all of our students will be protected?
Okay. I guess the first obvious point, the plan I put in front of you, I've used the word all students, all children several times. I believe in that. The parts of my life where I've done the hardest work are with people that don't look like me, don't sound like me, don't necessarily believe like me. I've never left one of them in a lurch, to use one of my dad's old phrases. I will go back, I will find them wherever they are, and I will bring them where they need to be with every resource I have. And if I have inadequate resources, I will reprioritize resources. As I've analyzed, as I've said, and I want to just keep stressing this, I can only look and see what I can look and see through the Sarasota County Schools website. You sound like me. Both my children, I trusted the Clay County school system with them, and they haven't broke them. They're stronger, smarter, and pretty productive members of society. Both of them are employed, and it's been a good ride. Now, has everything been perfect? No. You asked actually about revisionist history, ma'am, and I forgot to hit on that. The thing that frustrated me severely is they would come home with social studies books, and I'm not going to throw Pearson and Rand McNally under the bus, but there were some pretty awful choices for social studies to teach civics in 7th grade. So what I did is I had some local businessmen in Jacksonville. They were already doing it to whoever would listen, but not many people would listen. I wish I had one of them with me. I took a book with all of our founding documents, starting back with the Mayflower Compact, Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and we went into our civics classrooms. We trained our civics teachers how to teach from original, unfettered, unedited documents. We didn't want somebody's spin on why we are the nation that we are. We had 56 founders who signed their name on the bottom of that Declaration of Independence. And they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And so it meant something to be an American citizen. It was a great, great responsibility. And lots of people in America then weren't citizens. Lots of people in America now aren't citizens. That is fine as long as we all have a path to get there and a deep appreciation for what has made America great. So sorry I missed that. That just stuck out as a sore thumb when you said whatever you said. And now I've forgotten your original question. I apologize. But that's something I'm very, very passionate about. And our civics scores rocketed. They're still using that. And Clay County quickly went into the top 10 in Florida in civics. And so I apologize. Let me circle back around to, that isn't exactly what you asked me.
Well, what I asked you is, since we have such a diverse student body population.
Okay. So right now, everybody that isn't affluent or a Caucasian, you take that mix out of your current proficiency grades, and it is not a pretty data picture at all. I had it written down. I think 13% of your 5th graders, minus the 2 subgroups I just mentioned, 13% of your 5th graders are proficient in math minus those 2 things. Look it up, check me. It could have been some other number, but it wasn't a number that would be acceptable at all. And if I was somebody that my first language wasn't English, and so my children heard languages other than English regularly, and there wasn't English spoken in the home, and there wasn't a good phonics-based curriculum to teach them how to read, and that wasn't reinforced, then that student's going to continue to struggle. So again, I will go back and pick and meet up with everybody wherever they are, but I am not going to leave them there. So if you want somebody that would do that, I'm not the guy, I promise you. We will meet every ethnicity, every socioeconomic level, where they are. They have to learn to speak and read the English language. It's wonderful if you can master several languages, but if you're going to be successful in this country, you have to learn to read and speak and write the English language. So we have to provide the tools and supports to the teachers, and nothing I'm saying is going to be shocking to any of your instructional staff. I just can't imagine that it is. And they already know the answer. They're looking at the same things I am. They're saying, gosh, we need some help here. So we'll reprioritize resources and efforts. Everything has to be in a priority. And right now that primary grades reading among several subgroups has to become the priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Zant. Ron Cutsinger, Sarasota County Commissioner. And since my other 2 questions got taken, thank you very much. I'm just going to ask you, you're obviously a strategic thinker.
Yes, sir.
And a strategic planner. So what do you anticipate is going to be your biggest challenge if you get the nod?
Change. Change is tough. But it's necessary. And everybody sees it. I haven't seen anybody shaking their head like this, and if you feel like that, please feel free, or write me a note or give me a call if I'm way off base. But planning the change, I had opportunity to talk initially with each board member last week, and they see it as well. Nobody on your board is satisfied with where they are. Nobody on your board has the exact same idea on where to go to get there. Everybody I spoke to tells me, and hey, I've had one 30-minute conversation with 5 people. I'm not an expert in Sarasota County yet, but I've watched several of their meetings. I've watched the budget workshop on May 30th for 3 hours, and there are a very resounding cry to how are you going to reach these students? And it's not going to be by piling on more administrators. Just like in the sheriff's office, if you want to prevent crime on the street, you don't need 5 more guys with stars on their collar. You need a couple of those people, but you need officers on the street, in the community, talking to people, interacting with people, learning the neighborhoods, learning the families. When I taught junior high, I knew those families. And back then we didn't have cell phones, but since my building was previously a wood shop and a metal shop, I had a phone so if somebody cut their finger off, but I didn't use those tools. But I had the phone. So if I had a disruptive student, and this is the late 90s, my first move was go in my office, call your mom or dad, grandma, whoever you live with, and get them on the phone and let me know when they're on the phone and tell them why you're calling. That was a 50-50 shot back then. Sometimes, I'm so sorry, Mr. Van Zant, this will not happen again. I'd walk in and that child was already being brought back into some corrective action by their own authority figure. Sometimes I'd pick up the phone and it'd be like, well, who's little Johnny sitting next to? That kid's the trouble. But, you know, that literally solved half of it. But change is tough. And those behaviors have gotten more exacerbated in recent years. So we're going to have to go and look at all that. And school board and superintendent relationships and behaviors are very important too. So I have to go to public meetings under Florida law and the Constitution and Florida statute. It's my job to prepare an agenda. It's the board chair's job to run the meeting. But once we all decide on the direction, whether or not it was Charlie Van Zant's exact idea, that's the direction I'm heading in. Okay, I went to combat under 3 different presidents, all over the map in their personal backgrounds, their political views, but I had to serve and execute all the lawful orders of the officers appointed over me, to include the Commander-in-Chief of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief of the Florida Army National Guard. When I worked with the Clay County School Board, I had a direct link to the community because I was elected. Here that linkage looks a little different because I'm being hired and overlooked, but it's not the board's job to figure out what the next reading program is, so don't misunderstand me. It's not the board's job to go into communities and make relationships for me. That's my job. That's all on me. My job is to bring them good ideas, give them the school board governance and budgetary oversight, but I shouldn't be asking them where they want to spend the money. I should be coming and saying, based on everything I can find out, all the data dashboards I can look at, based on hearing from the parents, hearing from the teachers, hearing from the school-based administrators, we, your district senior staff, think that this is the way we ought to move down the road with the budget, or this is the way we ought to adopt a new curriculum and instruction plan, or this is the way we just need to tweak our career and tech ed and vocational and technical offerings so that these kids that aren't going to college, we know they're not going to college, their parents have told us they aren't going to college, they have a craft, they have a skill to go and get a job. So all of that is not easy. I know how to do all of this. I've done it all well. Have I done it all perfectly? No. Have I done it all completely? No, because it takes buy-in from every stakeholder. And I've already enumerated who all those people might be, and I may have left some out. But it's a coalition of everybody who's willing to get in the boat and row the same direction and not drill a hole in the bottom of the boat while we're trying to do it. Did that adequately answer your question, sir?
Thanks.
Thank you. Sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Van Zant. My name is Chris Morales. I'm the Deputy Chief of Police for the Northport Police Department. Grew up in Sarasota County, grew up through the school system here. I have 2 children that attend the school, Sarasota County School Board, in the sophomore in Northport High and a 5th grader at Toledo Blade Elementary School. And my wife's also a school counselor. First, I want to say thank you for your service. And my favorite piece of equipment in the military is the Apache helicopter. So,
If you need it and hear it coming, it's a comforting sound, isn't it?
Trying to get the sheriff to buy one, but I don't think the county can.
I'll be a reserve deputy if he does.
Stay on task.
Yeah. My question to you is, as a superintendent in Clay County, can you tell me a time when you had to deliver an unpopular decision? How did you deliver
Which
it?
day? Yes, sir. Go ahead. Sorry.
How did you deliver it and what was the outcome?
Okay. Wow. So probably the thing that mattered most to the 5,000 and few employees we had was their income, right? They all had to pay mortgages, they had to pay taxes, they had to make the car payment. Little Johnny and little Jane need braces. All the stuff that we all struggle with as we raise our children and need our income to provide for it. My predecessor, nice guy, lifetime educator, but he was superintendent between 08 and 12, so he took over right after the housing market fell apart, during the years which every county in Florida got some level of federal stimulus money, and the third year installment of that was jobs money. And he took over with a decent fund balance, the savings account, what you have left when you're not spending everything every day to pay everybody. And he went through either 61 or 71 million dollars, and you'd have to call Clay County to find out, of non-reoccurring funds in reoccurring lines of the budget. So whether he had continued to be superintendent, me or Bugs Bunny took over, we were on a trajectory, because school board members and superintendents take office when, if they're elected? The week of Thanksgiving, okay? So you're living your predecessor's budget, you're living their curriculum and instruction academic plans, you're living however they allocated the resources and the people across your county. So it became eerily apparent to me that we were going to drop below 3% by spring. Again, I took over in November. And so you're getting your FEFP, your Florida Education Finance Program, draw every 2 weeks throughout that school year. So if you can guess, the teachers and the support staff who worked hard every day needed a raise, wanted a raise, the cost of all their expenses was going up, and a raise had not been budgeted for because of the non-reoccurring funds being spent by the tens of millions in reoccurring lines of the budget. I had actually, my last year on the school board transitioning to superintendent, had not voted in support of the budget, because I'm like, we can't continue to spend money that we do not have. That makes sense, right? And if somebody wants to make copies of this, you can all have it. But I had to draw a stark contrast. So this was the previous years. The red was what we spent in Clay County. The blue is what we had. So along about here, I think this year I was in Afghanistan, and this budget I was back, and I said, we got to stop that. I can't support this budget because we're about out of savings. I mean, the piggy bank was busted open, we were bleeding dry. So I had to deliver that message. And I won't say that I'm the best budget guy in the world, but I am a tremendous fiscal steward of money that is not mine. Now, I might splurge on my wife's anniversary gift. We're hitting 30 next year, but I'm not going to splurge with your money when I can't do it. So what did I do? I had to tell people about it. Was that popular? No. Did I have lines in the school board meeting room informing me of how I was taking food off the table, gas out of the tank? Yes, I did. Did I have another choice? Not exactly. You can't spend more than you have, right? They didn't have a big MasterCard or something. I was statutorily told my savings account had to be 3% of my annual operational budget. But what I did do to help with the situation, I hope that was part of your question, was start becoming a great advocate, not a lobbyist. I'm not a registered lobbyist, but I went to Tallahassee. I went to everybody that appropriated funds for education in Florida. I went to General Appropriations Chairman, And at the time, Governor Rick Scott was the commander-in-chief of Florida. He was the governor. And his proclamation was 700,000 jobs in 7 years. So I recreated our career and technical education programs around the ability to immediately employ people. Now, could I make somebody a chef that wanted to go work in a restaurant during their high school career? No. But there was another culinary certification as a food prepper they could attain while in high school if we could keep them on that track and graduate with an industry certification. By the way, industry certifications, if you can keep a student interested in the same program for 3 years, you get extra money for that. So in 2016, I'd worked extensively with Mrs. Kim McDougall, which is still in Tallahassee somewhere. She used to be in the Florida Department of Education. And she had gone over to handle educational issues in Governor Scott's cabinet. So back in August and September of the year prior to me asking for the money, I started doing what I call veto proofing. That isn't a thing. I don't think you can Google it. But I didn't want the money to get appropriated after all that work and then get vetoed. So I wrapped what we were doing for Clay County students that I heard from parents, from community members, from business owners. Hey, we need car mechanics. We need culinary arts. We need architects and engineers. So we built coalitions into our schools. So each high school of the 7 had school advisory committees, and each of those academies, whether they were aerospace engineering or car maintenance, had professionals in the field from businesses that were represented in the greater Clay County area to include Jacksonville. And these ladies and gentlemen invested money, more importantly, their own time and expertise, and they wrote letters for me. I said, this is what we're trying to do. This is why we're trying to do it. So for months before that legislative session even started that March, our legislators and our governor and the DOE staff was hearing the same unified message out of Clay County, Florida, from all of our stakeholders. Look, we need these people, we need this money. And so we ended up with a special appropriation that let us create some career academies. But delivering that message wasn't fun. I did it in a timely fashion, but you know, it wasn't well received, but it was well intended and it was factual. Did that get it?
So we have 7 more questions and 30 minutes, so.
Jeez, I'm sorry, I'm talking too long.
Just want
Let
to
me
make
turn
sure
my
everybody
clock
has the
back on.
opportunity to ask their question.
3 minutes apiece.
Mr. Van Zandt, I'm Sarasota County Sheriff Kurt Hoffman. I want to thank you for your service as well. I come from a military family. I sincerely appreciate that. My question is about how you, whether it's a policy, whether it's a curriculum change, we've talked about phonics, parental involvement, closing the achievement gap, spending. When you get that directive from the board, and now you've got to send it out to an organization that's, you know, over 7,000 people, what is the method by which you make sure that there's consistency in this district and that it's communicated appropriately from the board, so we don't have pieces of this district being freelanced or doing something different than what the directive of the board is?
Okay, well, part of that's a communications question. So when I became superintendent, I realized that I did not have all the requisite skills to run an organization with over 5,000 employees and 37,000 students. So I pursued the rest of a master's degree that I had started in educational leadership back before one of my deployments and got it in organizational leadership. One of the projects I did, and I presented in front of all of my administrators in the district, school-based and district-based, I pulled in several people. I asked them some basic questions about how they like to be communicated with. So obviously, if, God forbid, there's ever an active shooter, that's quick, and by all means, you punch all the buttons, you scream into your radios, you call on the cell phone, you do whatever you got to have. But if it's a systemic change that's coming, like a reading plan, you hit email, you hit every social media platform you have, you can send home the voice calls. You meet people where they are because they're all over the map. The other thing I learned as a superintendent, who my wife and I waited till we were in our 30s to have our children, I had other parents much younger than me walking up to me at the ball field saying, "Hey, Mr. Vance." I'm like, "Look, dude, no, we're all parents out here. Let's." But they were all on their phones all the time, even in their kids' baseball games, unfortunately. So there were no social media platforms in Clay County. So whether it's talking, texting, emailing, ads in the newspaper, asking, somebody here's from a media outlet, coming to do a story, getting on the radio. I've been on talk radio, I've been on morning TV broadcast out of Jacksonville. However and whatever and to all extents necessary, you get out the important information. Now, your second part of your question was how do you make sure everybody's actually doing it? Those are inspection protocols, which I have done numerous of. Operational effectiveness inspections. As a major and lieutenant colonel, I did a number of those for the Florida Army National Guard. I'd walk into an organization and say, okay, we're going to talk about what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're assessing it. And everybody's got to be held accountable. That's not a bad thing. You just have to make sure everybody's actually on the same page. And if they're not, you take corrective action and you pull them back on the same page. So that will be done by my senior staff, whoever that is, if they're not already doing it.
Thank you. Charlie Keith Mercier. I'm a commercial insurance broker and employee benefits broker. I grew up here in Sarasota. Thank you for your service. Also, I come from a military family. Whether it's business or school related, or whether it was something to do with the military, can you give us an example of when you went into a situation and it may not have been the best culture from a work standpoint? What did you do to go in and fix that to get everybody back on the same page?
Well, it all rises and falls on leadership. And unfortunately, the two principals in my hometown had to move out of those positions. I kept them in jobs, I kept them employed, not exactly at the same level, but the culture wasn't right in either of those two schools. And that hurt. Those are hard conversations to have, but that was after 2 years of leading them in the direction I wanted them to go and not getting the results that I needed. So that is one example, and I think that's the example your school board finds itself in right now. The other example is everybody was riding rodeo instead of equestrian down to every classroom level. You had very veteran teachers that taught the way they taught in the 60s and 70s. They were still teaching like that in 2012. And so we had to bring some alignment. We had to bring in some common operating systems. We had to build some systems. And sometimes we would send out district office staff and they would come back very upset because Miss So-and-so, who's been there 30-something years and is in the drop program, yelled at me after all the kids left and didn't want to take anything that we had discussed. Well, I started out my superintendency the first week by inviting everybody in the district that they would come to focus groups. And this was business owners and parents and teachers and administrators at the school and at the district office, and we talked about what our opportunity gaps were, where we need to shore things up, and we got input from everybody, and then I took a plan, I brought it back to the board. It was designed, approved, 5-0 vote, and then in the execution phase, you just have to continually reassess and hold people accountable.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Zant, Paul Caragiulo, I'm district parent. I want to ask you, since you've been doing a lot of talking, which means you've covered a lot of ground. So I just have one thing I wanted to bring up. So your Clay County's not one of the coastal communities in Florida, but I mean, you do have the St. Johns River, which is an awful lot of water right there. Because we are a coastal community, our emergency management protocols are a little different. Everything from what we're required to carry in reserves for operating, how we act under the emergency management apparatus, and of course, anyone who's been in the middle of it in this community can see the scary, along with an environment that's very collaborative. So my question to you is, obviously with your military training and the amount, so you were the P3 at Fort Bragg, is that correct?
Policy programs and personnel. So,
yes, so you've been involved in writing a lot of program-ish and altering programs. How do you find your ability to work collaboratively in sort of interjurisdictional, intergovernmental things when you have a military background, which is very clear about the chain of command. So how are you to work with if you are another government agency?
I think I'm very easy to work with. I mean, I could show you, I've got 30 years worth of officer evaluation reports, and a lot of guys that flew Apache helicopters were very type A, thumped their chest, my way or the highway. Clint Eastwood and John Wayne made some great movies, but they didn't do me any favors in the education world. Because everybody assumes that I'll come in inflexible, and that could not be farther from the truth. The general officers I worked for, the colonels I worked for my first deployment as a first lieutenant, you know who had to go talk to the Kuwaiti Air Force commander when we were living in tents on his airfield in 1998? Not the colonel in charge of the task force. No, sir, not him either. The first lieutenant from Florida. Oh, Charlie, you'll go make friends with him. Just go on in. And so and that went all the way up till I retired as a lieutenant colonel. I was the one, if the congressman was coming to visit Camp Blanding Training Site, which is in Clay County and in the Army National Guard Training Base, if somebody had to go to Tallahassee and advocate for more GI Bill money or some greater relief programs for our spouses and children when people were deployed, it always got to be me. And so at first it was supposed to be I was on special assignment to the one-star overall community programs, and I was to make appointments and escort him to them and interpret anything, much like I used interpreters several times in the Middle East. After the first couple of days of that, he would just tell me what he wanted to happen, and I would go, because he didn't like to do that kind of stuff. So I helped set up the Florida Youth Challenge Academy at Camp Blanding. It was a cooperation between the Department of Military Affairs, Florida Guard, Department of Children and Families, Department of Juvenile Justice, Florida DOE, and the Clay County School Board. And I was a board member at the time, probably 29, 30 years old after my first deployment. And I could enumerate all day long in Florida and in other countries and in Tallahassee and in Washington, D.C. And right after 9/11, I was sent to Pennsylvania to meet with Governor Tom Ridge, who became our Homeland Security Director later. 2002, I was commanding a bomb disposal unit, EOD unit. Don't ask me how I got bequeathed with that, but 9/11 happened, the commander left, and there was only one of them in Florida. So every alphabet agency in the world that was concerned about safety and security at Salt Lake City Winter Olympics in 2002, I was there coordinating with all of them. And I've had glowing reviews, except for when a parent would disagree about their child after I'd made every effort. And when you have 37,000 students, you're not going to please everybody all day long. And when you can't give the raise that everybody wants and deserves, you're going to have some problems. But barring those two issues that were out of my control, everything I could control, I did with results that were laudable.
Hi, I'm Eric Robinson. And I was a CB, and I got activated in Desert Storm right out of University of Florida. So we have a couple of things. And home of the Fighting Gators, you left that part off. We have, you've talked about a lot of education, but to piggyback off Paul Caragiulo's, the operations, when it works, nobody talks about it. The buses run on time, the food's served on time. We have a great chief operating officer here. So I have kind of a two-part question. How has your military background affected how you run things on the operation side? And do you plan on bringing the transition team in, or you know, if things are running good, will you continue on, or what's your plan?
Great question, right in my wheelhouse. If all the trains are running on time, the beans, balls, the buses are all in alignment, everybody's getting fed breakfast and lunch that ought to be getting fed breakfast and lunch, everybody's getting to school on time, no problem in the operations. When I get with these gentlemen and the COO and look at the safety and security plan for the schools, if that passes the smell test, I won't suggest any changes. Based on my experience having 4 schools locked down for 5 hours with somebody we would have never guessed that was a former sheriff's nephew and a current county commissioner's son. Never could have expected it. He went through the same protocol coming in the building that I did, And the system you have that printed me this nice sticker that won't stay on my jacket tells us if I'm a sexual predator, sexual deviant, or something like that that you can tell off a driver's license. It does not tell you literally if I need my head examined or I'm a threat. So we have to be ever vigilant. And I may offend somebody over student safety, but I will have to understand every aspect of it to not offer any change based off of what I've been through overseas and here. So.
How will your military experience impact how?
Oh, well, I flew all over 2 combat zones, Iraq and Afghanistan. I always, in the military, if everybody's getting their mail, if everybody's getting paid, if everybody has clear direction, and everybody understands the mission down to the lowest private. I was an old guy by the time I got to flying in Iraq. I was already 36. In the aviation battalion in that world, I was pretty seasoned. My door gunners were sometimes, and my medics, and those are 2 different missions, but sometimes they were 18, 19, 20 years old. But they had to understand exactly what was going to happen if we went down mechanically, shot down, etc. in Iraq, where we were, keep up with us on the map so that we knew how we could get to the next place. So if you have systems in place that are working, that is great. But I've learned that nobody ever has every system right. When I got over there, as a general service aviation battalion, the area we had previously, like 3 rotations prior, been occupied by some gunship pilots, some Marine Corps Cobras, and some AH-64 Apaches from the Army. And in the connexes my supply guys inherited, they had Hellfire missiles and 30mm rounds and stuff that your medevac and general support guys don't need, don't have, and who's accounting for those, and whose containers are these, and whether they're yours now, Major. Like, holy smokes. So I doubt I'll find anything so egregious in Sarasota County, but I will look, and I will talk, and I will be respectful, and I will be so firm in the COO's realm. If he's doing it all right, or she, no problem. If they're not, I'm going to offer some adjustments and some realignment.
Hi, I'm Katrina Ward. I'm a retired Sarasota County Schools employee.
Well, thank you for that.
And thank you for your service. My question is really simple. How will you support district level and school-based level leadership so that they're able to foster an operational and a learning climate where each student, every parent, every staff member, and the community members at large to feel included, visible, and heard without any negative recourses occurring?
Well, first and foremost, nobody gets penalized for whatever they're doing now under current systems or under their former supervisor's authority or direction. Now, if I work with the board, do all this assessment and listening and learning and the things that are articulated in that initial entry plan, initial action plan, which is not a strategic plan, that could be a catalyst to building or refining the current strategic plan. Everybody gets to start at dead even with me. Actually, school starts in a very short amount of time. So everybody starts with an amount of institutional trust. I have to believe that the people that are there now wouldn't be in the positions if they hadn't demonstrated to somebody along the way that they should be in an administrative position. I will conduct communication surveys personally and online with everybody so that I know how they like to be communicated with. I will share the initial action steps. I will share any revisions to the strategic plan, or if I'm directed to build an entire new strategic plan, if I come to that determination and the board signals that's in collaboration with what they want to do. And then, guess what? Everybody's got to follow whatever the new or revised plan is, and they'll be held accountable to metrics that are timely, make sense in accordance with the district vision and the strategic plan, and then that accountability piece comes in. So if everybody then works as well under the new systems as they did to get to that level of assistant principal, deputy superintendent, school principal, whatever that they are, no problems. If they can't adapt after clear guidance has been given, then we have to do some retraining, and that's kind of where all that lies. But I would stress this, and we might not be in a climate where, like when I first became a superintendent in 2012, we can wait 2 years before I make administrative changes, but I didn't have very many administrators, and to give teacher and support staff raises, I actually had to diminish my own senior leadership in the district office to have any money at all to rub two nickels together to give any kind of raise in 2016. So I don't know if that exactly covered it. It'll be a transition. It might not take as long as everybody wants. I don't believe in pulling the earth out of anybody's feet. I don't believe in holding anybody accountable today or next week if offered this position for what their former boss told them. But we all have to change every school year. So we're going to adapt and do whatever follows Florida law, board policy, and my guidance.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, Mr. Vincent. I'm Dr. Gary Kompothicus. I'm a resident for 40 years in Sarasota. I have 6 children, all through triplets, 11. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, my question is going to be a simple yes, no.
Okay.
Okay. So we're mindful of time. All these candidates we're interviewing, they all 4 are very qualified. Okay, you being one of them. You seem to be a very nice candidate, caring person. I believe, by my own experience and my whatever, being around here long enough, that Sarasota County needs a whole new top tier level of people coming in here. I think if one person comes in here, he's going to be alienated, and it's going to be a tough job for any human being to move the school system. I think a clean house approach, in my opinion, would be what's necessary. If you weren't elected or picked, and again, we don't have any choice in picking anybody, we just voice our opinions, and there's the school board, and this is probably going to be up to whoever they're going to pick as superintendent. But would you entertain a second position, like assistant superintendent, to help whoever they do pick, or is it just you want that job and that's it?
Oh gosh. So yes. So a servant leader, which I am, because I studied it. You don't just, everybody tells you they're a strategic planner and a servant leader. And if they've not studied servant leadership and they have no strategic planning credentials, they're just giving you a warm fuzzy. I'm both. I'm humble. So the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is my first school year after being the superintendent of schools in Clay County, having run 45 schools, 37,000 children, 5,000 employees, was to be a first-year teacher in Duval County. I had a job offer coming. The company was being restructured. I knew it was coming. This school on the west side of Jacksonville, where the kids were known to be a little rough around the edges, a friend of mine that was also a retired Florida Guard, Air Guard F-15 pilot, was running the Embry-Riddle aeronautics program for dual enrollment. He said, "Charlie, I have nobody credentialed to teach basic aeronautics. Would you please come teach basic aeronautics?" I said, "Buck, no principal in Duval County wants the former superintendent in Clay like 7-8 months ago in their building." He's like, "Yes, they do. I've already told them that you're waiting on something else." So I had to look at myself in the mirror. My kids were about 8 and 12 or something like along those lines at the time, and say, so because my wife and I had financially planned well, it was okay for me not to work for a period of time. Couldn't have done it forever. Wasn't retired, wasn't drawing a pension. And I said, there is no good reason I can't go help that school, can't show my boys that the adults in the family ought to be getting up and going to work unless they're physically disabled. So that's what I did. So, past practice is often a good indicator of future behavior. I'm not looking for that. I've looked at everybody else's resume. I've watched their videos that we all submitted last week or the week before. but like I said before, it's never my way or the highway. If I can be helpful, I'm willing to be helpful, to include in an unpaid status when somebody else takes over, if it's not me and doesn't want to change a thing, which I don't see how they would move through that, but.
Thank
So,
you.
Mr. Van Zant, your last question is from the gentleman behind you.
So, my screen got truncated after lunch, so unfortunately, Mr. Van Zant can't see your back, or Dr. K, or some of the other members of this August panel. And I know we're running out of time. Maybe if you don't mind, in the remaining moments that we have, just perhaps be a little bit vulnerable with us and talking about if you had all of the folks that were your direct reports, perhaps in the most recent period of time in military service, particularly during your period as superintendent Clay County, not only direct reports, but your board members there in Clay County, could you tell us what they would tell, the good, the bad, where there's areas of development, and your approach then to leadership development for yourself, and then as well as for your team, your cabinet, if you will, as a superintendent of schools?
Okay, so I'll work backwards because I meant to say this earlier. I take, since you can't see me, I'm going to turn back around to you guys, personal accountability in leadership development. I will teach the leadership of development for the administrators in Sarasota County if offered this job in several of the senses, especially the COO piece, and how to make the wheels turn in the railroad efficiently. Sarasota is in a far better financial situation than I ever was in Clay, and I feel confident that I can lead across all areas. I will bring in expertise. Somebody asked about a transition team. I would like to bring in a couple of people that I already know and trust, and more importantly, that know me well. And if I'm offered this position, I'm going to try to drag a few of my friends out of retirement that won't be reoccurring costs to the district, and give everybody that's already occupying a spot here a fair chance to show their competence and show their commitment and move forward. And then as those people prove to me that they're not competent, or God forbid any of them do anything immoral, illegal, or unethical, they would have to go. Speaking back to my military members, they would all love a chance to work with me again. Some of those have crossed over into school districts. You might get to meet a few if I come. We'll have to see. I haven't approached anybody because I don't even know if I'm coming, right? But what they would say about me is, Charlie can't talk brief enough. We always were told as officers to brief, and he talks too long. And I do, I own that. But they would say that he cares a lot. I can't sleep well if people are up in the middle of the night in a foxhole. I go around and visit them. If it's cold, I bring some coffee. I do whatever I can to support my soldiers in the field. If you talk to former Clay County School Board members, some of them loved me, some of them didn't love me so much, but they would always tell you that I came across with what I thought would be best for children, and I wish I had it with me. My political advice in 1998 when I first ran for school board was always keep the children in the center of every decision, and the guidance my father gave me. How many of you guys have a pocket in your shirt? The ones that fit me and don't show off that I have a very short neck don't have pockets in them anymore when Men's Warehouse brings them to the door. So, but my guidance was to make a little campaign thing that folded and opened up and put in your pocket, and it said every decision that I make will be guided by what I think is the best for the students. Now, when you're accountable to the entire 200,000 plus people in Clay County, and half or more of them that show up to vote in a general election, then you can't always do exactly what each school board member wants you to do, because you, like the board members, are accountable to the board. So the ones that had no vision but an agenda, they would probably not give a great report. But I will tell you this, in 4 years, there were 5-0 votes on every budget I presented, and that's clearly the superintendent's role to present the budget. They're on the instructional plans, reading plans, academic plans, Student discipline, student code of conduct, every plan of substance that I presented was a 5-0 vote. Now, there were tweaks in the way people wished I had handled something maybe a little differently, but there was never another idea brought by the board to where they couldn't live with what I brought through caring leadership, through servant leadership, through being humble and kind to everybody that I could for as long as I possibly could. But then you have to build in structures with benchmarks, timelines, and accountability and hold people accountable. And some people just don't like that. Some people are like, hey man, I'm out. I don't want to be a principal anymore. I've seen them go back to teaching PE. That only happened to me twice, but they're like, the whole world's different. I was told to keep the grass cut, the lockers and locked, the books issued, and you're asking me to be an instructional leader, and I'm not. So I better be quiet.
Perfect timing. I thought that was a great question. And
Thank you,
conclusion.
sir.
So do you have maybe 1 minute to summarize up and leave this group with final thoughts?
This is a brilliant group. If they haven't figured out who I am by now, I don't think I can tell them any more in a minute. But I'm a guy that comes from very humble beginnings. I love my wife. I could not literally have gotten down here into it today without Stephanie. She's been my partner in everything. So first and foremost, keeping that relationship and that covenant that we entered in 1994 strong is the most important relationship I have on the earth. My boys, I've raised them well enough that if somehow, God forbid, I was taken out of the equation today, they could be self-sufficient, even the one that's still in high school. You could lock him outside, he'd figure out how to catch a fish, hunt a deer, and cook his own dinner, and he can do those things. So those are where I draw my most and best use. And everything else I've done, through God's grace, great support, great teamwork, soldiers, airmen, medics, I'm still here before you today, 52, pushing 53 years later, and I'm so humbled and glad to be here with you.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you very much.